Hi guys, welcome back. Okay, today's video I'm sticking into the mix. I wasn't expecting to be doing this video, at least not now, but I went into my mail today. I had so many people write to me with questions that I'm just going to address a lot of the ones that were longer in a video form. The video today is going to be on composition and some other questions, really good questions that people have asked me. Also, when I got into my mail today, I got a very nice letter from Colorit, and they are offering my subscribers 2 coloring books. They're going to be giving away the Tropical Scenes coloring book. So I'm going to pick out of a hat from the comments below, and anybody that puts the comments below will be in that drawing. So I'm going to do that in a couple of days. I'm going to give it like 3 days for it to populate, the comments. Not everybody sees it immediately. And this is the book. It's the one that I did the clamshell out of. I had a question about this book, or something came up about this book that I'm going to address, and it's a very good topic for me to talk to you guys about. Somebody made a comment that this book was not good for pencils. I'm going to agree and disagree. Okay? This book is fine for pencils. But like all coloring books and all paper, not all paper is good for watercolors. Some are good for markers. Some are made for pencils. The paper in this book, I had no problem coloring it. All books, now coloring books, this happens with coloring books. Depending on the paper, when we talk about cheap paper versus more expensive paper that come into the coloring books, everybody likes a thicker page, and I don't blame them because it takes pencil much better. We're going to talk a little bit about tooth on a page and why some books are better for some things better than others. Now, if you use a CreateSpace book, their paper is very cheap. What I mean by cheap is that the paper, once you start coloring on it, very quickly frays. Now, when I'm talking about fraying, remember, when you're rubbing the paper, imagine carpeting, and you're rubbing your pencil on the carpeting, and you're hoping that the wax gets in between the fibers. Well, that would be the same thing as the tooth in the paper. You're hoping that the tooth will grab the color and the wax will stay on the paper. When you overwork a book, which is extremely easy, I do it all the time, you're going from light layers to burnish, and all of a sudden at the end, you start to notice a fraying of the paper. When you run your pencil over those last top layers, it sort of looks fibrous. You will see it without a doubt in the CreateSpace paper. When you get to that, and it doesn't take much, a couple of layers in, you'll start noticing little white spots. So you color in those little white spots, and more little white spots come in. And you color those in, and more and more. There's no ending. Give it up. There's no ending that. What's happening is the paper is coming up. So every time you run your pencil over those little fibers, it churns up more little fibers, which are like stuck to the book, and you can just keep going on and on and on. Now, when it came to Tropical Scenes, I overworked that paper. I think I was coloring on that clamshell for about 4 or 5 hours. And it was because I was like watching Game of Thrones, and I just wasn't in the mood to do anything else. I just wanted to do that. I was enjoying myself. I get to be like that. And by the end, I started noticing a little bit of those fibers coming up. That was me. I should have stopped way before I did. And all paper can do this. us in the coloring book world versus those in the artistic world that are like selling their artwork and using original artwork and archival paper where it's where you're spending $4 or $5 for a sheet of paper. There's a big difference in what you can produce. Those papers are made for holding up against the pencil. You could put on 20 layers and you won't fray the paper. It was designed that way. There is really no coloring books out on the market that you're going to get at the prices that we pay for our coloring books that you're not going to have paper that doesn't fray just a little bit. It can make it look a little dirtyish, where you know you're coloring pure color and then it just becomes uneven. That happens a lot. With tropical scenes, I abused the paper. It came up, and other people who are used to coloring the way you're supposed to in multiple layers, it can happen. Most of the people that are beginners, they underdo their pictures, so it's not going to be a problem to you. You don't know how to layer 20 layers and get a certain color yet, or a certain shading on it because you put multiple layers on it. You're just learning. And by the time you get to that level where you really are getting frustrated, and if you're getting frustrated with the quality of your paper, it's time for you to move on because you've saturated your talent in the books. And that's why I'm moving my channel in both directions for the little bit more advanced people who need a push and for the beginner. By the time you're advanced, you probably are not watching how-to videos anymore. Maybe some inspirational videos, but that, or a techniques video that you didn't, think, but you're not really watching how to blend, colored pencils. So when it comes to tropical scenes, yeah, you can overwork the paper. This is good paper. It was brought up that it would be better for markers. I completely agree with that. This paper is perfect for markers. In fact, there's one picture in here that I'll be doing. It's definitely on my to-do list, and it's this one. I know it's cockeyed here. I'm going to be demoing this one. And I'm going to be using markers. I'm going to be using some watercolor on it. And I do believe that this paper will be able to take the abuse I'm going to give it. And if it doesn't, well, you'll probably not see it because I won't make the video on it. But I could definitely tell that this will take either the marker or watercolors very easily. So that's that on this book. We're giving away 2 of them, and best of luck to the winners. Okay, the next topic, take a look at this picture here. It just so happened that Melody asked me about this technique just today, and Tammy, my friend, just happened to have been working on a picture that looks just like the one she was asking. So this is Tammy's work. I've already written to her to find out what she used on that. So Melody, I will be getting the answer because I really think this picture rocks. I love it. I love the shading on it. I want to know what she used on it. And I told you guys, she's a good artist. She knows what she's doing. So Melody, the answer to your question is yes, it can be achieved. And I will be getting more detailed explanations to you very soon. Okay, Dee talked about, I read her mail today, and she asked me 2 questions that were really good. One was what electric pencil sharpener I am using. And I sharpen my pencils in a couple of different ways. If I've got like a new pencil, like here, one I just pulled, this one's just pulled out from the Prismacolor box and it's brand new. I haven't really sharpened it. I'm still working off the first point that they give us when we get the box. I'll put it into my electric pencil sharpener, and I use a Panasonic pencil sharpener. It's just a run-of-the-mill. There's nothing fancy about it. It's just a pencil sharpener. I got this pencil sharpener like 20 years ago, and it still works perfectly today. But when I have a pencil that's, say, looking like this, okay? And it's really worn and used, and it still has a little bit of the tip in there. But I want to work it really, really sharp. I have two pencil sharpeners that I use. I got this one off of Amazon, and it has two sizes, and it works really good. And I can get, when it's not completely full, I can get a nice point on it. It's getting a little dull now because I've used it a lot. And to sharpen up your pencil sharpener, use graphite, a graphite pencil, number 2. It's a good way of cleaning your sharpeners. For my needle sharp, when I want it that sharp, I want to be able to poke a hole in something. It's that sharp. Colorit is my absolute, this one's full, but this is my absolute pencil sharpener that I keep on the desk. When you use it, put the pencil in, and then you turn the pencil sharpener. If you don't, you will break your point off. Trust me, I went through half of the Colorit pencils that they sent me, getting very frustrated, breaking off their tips. And then I learned how to do it, and it became like one of my absolute favorite sharpeners. And when you go in on it, watch. I get that needle sharp. This pencil sharpener works best empty, and of course it's nice and full now. I have to empty it. If it's empty, it will just go totally needle-like for you. When you get those needle-like points, and it looks so lovely, and you go to use it, and all of a sudden the pencil point cracks off, and you're like, oh, and it's just the tip, that nice sharp tip that you wanted. Here is a hack for you. Turn your pencil point completely perpendicular to the page. Just until you use up that nice fine tip, color like this. Do not color in your normal way like this. You want this. It'll evenly put the pressure onto the tip, pushing upward this way. The pencil tips do not break off. And no matter how sharp your tip is, you're almost guaranteed that you will keep your needle like tip. And then once it dulls down to about this and that needle is off, then you can go back to your regular way of coloring something and you don't have to worry about it. So that's my big tip of the day. Next, and this is where I want to talk to you, the main focus of this video. Of course, 15 minutes into it, I'm getting to the main focus. Dee also asked me about composition. Now, we're going to be doing the next challenge picture where you guys are picking the picture for me. And this is going to be a picture that I do original artwork for, and I gave you guys, it's 2 videos back, I gave you the opportunity to choose what you want as the composition for that picture. And I will be going over this in detail with you. I'm going to do a whole composition picture, start to finish. Her question to me is, how do you know what a focal point, where the focal point is on the page, and how do you make that focal point stand out? I addressed it in another video recently, but I wanted to show you a little bit more in detail because she was still confused. The perfect example of complete confusion of the page would be Fairy Miracles. This page, there are things on the page that, in this book, that aren't clear on what the focal point can be. Now, this is an example picture of what is the focal point. You've got a swan here, you've got a fairy here, you've got a dragonfly, you've got this big flower. The composition of her pages are is very overcompensated. There's very little negative space in this book that she gives us to work with. I guess there's a lot of people who don't like to do backgrounds. I think Klara Markova did a great job in this book as far as the needs of the colorist. Now, I love this book because I don't finish all my pages, and you're going to see shortly when I go through my book. I just don't. I'm testing out new color combinations, and I just am coloring a little area. So you guys, this is the perfect book for that. But if you're looking to do whole pages, the book could be a little bit messy. The composition is difficult to choose one or focus in on one. Now, say you have something like this picture right here. Well, you've got the bunny here, you've got all these flowers, there's no negative space or very little negative space. Is it this? Is it this? Where do you put your eyes? It gets confused. It could be confusing. So what do you do? Well, when you're doing your original artwork, I'm going to go through all the tips for you on how to do original artwork composition to make it look great. We don't have that option in coloring books. We have to go by what the artist has chosen as the focal point of the picture. And every picture has a focal point. You need a focal point for your mind to just enjoy the picture. And when I mean focal point is, where does your eye go on the page first? So on this picture itself, I would probably use this as my focal point because people have a tendency of gravitating towards faces. It's the first thing people notice. If the page is, say, large, okay, see like her, your eye would go directly to her face. And then it would span out. Oh, there's a unicorn, and then there's down here. This is background noise. This is all negative space things that the artist put in. If the page is of a portrait, and say there's very little in the background, and it's just a portrait, a face, your focal point still is not the whole picture. You're not going to focus in on the whole thing, even though it's a face. The focal point of the picture would be the eyes, and you might not even realize it. Eyes are always the focal point, and that's why when you do your pupils and your pupils are wonky, it throws your picture off. Even though it's the most minute thing on the page, it's the tiniest thing. Now look at that picture from Leonardo da Vinci that I did a couple of pictures back. In the original artwork, Leonardo da Vinci made the eyes wonky. And it's been talked about for hundreds of years, him and his wonky eyes. How do people know? Because it feels odd. So even though it's a tiny portion, it is the focal point of the picture. It's going to grab you first and spread out from there. Now, what do you do to make a focal point stand out? Well, even though this picture here is a gigantic compilation, and as far as coloring people, this is perfect because I'll go in here and I'll color this, or I'll do a flower on this, and I'll walk away from the page. Feels good. I did my coloring for the day. I got my relaxation. My endorphins are going, and I'm great. But where is the focal point on this page? Well, I would do her, or I would do this as the focal. And you have three objects, groups of three, even though there's a flower there, it's in his hand. You can do a focal point 3, as long as it's telling a story. Okay? So here you have the boy going to the girl with a flower and an engagement ring. It's romantic. It's telling You could make up a whole entire bedtime story for your kids from just looking at this picture alone. And that's what's really good about this picture. Even though it's all over the place, there is a story. In every picture that you do, there should be a story about it. Now, on here, you have your rules of three. Here, you have 3 flowers, and the rest is background space. Out of these 3 flowers, the first one that comes to you is the one that's closest up to you. This is the focal point of the picture. Always do your focal points first, unless you are really super confident. I'm confident. I don't always do my focal points first. Sometimes I do my backgrounds first, but if you are a beginner, okay, and you're just picking up your pencils, you always do your focal point first. Why am I saying that? Because if you screw it up, you can move on to the next page without having a fantastic rest of the page and then your focal point being a disaster. So those are just some of my tips on focal points. Obviously, this is the focal point, and it's the rule of 3. 3 objects. Here is the cabbage. And now the story is she left her home in the morning, and she's flying to the cabbage, and there in the cabbage she's going to meet her little cricket friend. It tells you the story. The meeting place, I guess it's a rose. Ooh, sorry, it's not a cabbage. We just did the rose picture. How wonderful is this? I just taught you guys how to do a rose. I didn't even realize this was a rose, but it definitely is. The dragon, obviously, 2 eyes are looking at you. This is obviously the focal point. Do him in darker green. You can do a focal point where the background is lighter than the focal point, and you could do it the opposite. You can do the background darker and the object lighter. It can go both ways depending on how you want to bring it out. When there is a lot of objects, say on this page, how am I going to do my focal point? Well, I'm going to do this up very brightly. The dragon's going to be bright. It's going to attract your eyes. I'm going to do all the details on this. Then later on, I may not choose to do all the details. This is a little cone in this cone flower. I'll do it a little dark. It's not going to bring anything out. These other objects, I'm not going to do as detailed, because anything in the background, which is further away, is never your focal point, and it never has as much detail as the object that you are doing as your focal point. I would choose to do this dragon first, and even though I sometimes don't do my focal points first because I have experience, in this case, I would do this first, and I wouldn't even worry too much about the background. I would do that maybe a little lighter, not as many, or maybe I'll do him, actually, if I was really, I would do the background dark and then him really light green. I would use like my chartreuse and my grass greens and my true green on him first. The sleeping dragon is your focal point, and then you have the rules of 3. You've got 1 and 2 coming in to your focal point. This is now telling me a story. On this, it's very messy. Her face is the focal point, because there's so much going on in this picture. You really want her face to show up, or you may just choose her as a whole, holding the baby dragon as your focal point. So those are the ways to bring out a focal point. On here, this is one that I did a while ago, and she is obviously the focal point. And then I did this a little bright, and it's also sprayed, so it's really shiny. You could see I've got a finish on it. She was the focal point, and then everything is looking in. Now, they did 4. There really shouldn't have been 4, but it's art is art. Rules are meant to be broken, so that's But if you notice, it could be the rule of three. You have three objects honing in on a center object, which is, you know, it's telling the story. So these are just some ways of doing it. You definitely have the focal point is the fairy, and the background, not as detailed, not as much work. Now this one is a mess. What is the focal point? Well, obviously it's this house. And here I may just blend everything in. You can do it in monotone colors. You might decide to do this all in browns and beiges because it's houses and mushrooms, and this you can do like a toadstool in reds and whites. It's a way of doing it. So that is my lesson for today, and I will see you guys. I've got like 8 videos ready to go up. I'm gonna have to start like putting out more than once a day. So I didn't expect this one to be done tonight, and so there's a good possibility I'm gonna have one out tomorrow afternoon too. So take care, and I will see you in my next video. Bye bye.